Yes, as some of you may know, that I was chief counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. And during that time, I was contacted by the Congressional Research Service and participated in the 1977 research project that was asked to be done by President Jimmy Carter to provide information to the President on the potential existence of extraterrestrial intelligence and the relationship between that and these UFO sightings. And I participated in that, and that study came to the conclusion that there were at least from 2 to 6, it was a very conservative estimate, from 2 to 6 other highly intelligent, highly technologically developed civilizations in our own galaxy. And the fact that there are 500 billion galaxies would tend to give one, at that time, even in 1977, the understanding of the fundamental reality of the fact that our human species was not only not physically located in the center of the universe, as had one time been thought up until Galileo and Copernicus, and the major trauma that was inflicted upon the Western world upon coming to that realization, and how hard that was fought back against by the churches and the royalists in the world. But the fact of the matter is that we've now come to grips with the reality that we're not physically located in the center of the universe, but we have substituted for that this new mythology that we are somehow located at the absolute apex of the pyramid of life. And we're on the brink at this time of coming to realize that that's not true either. And yet our own self-image, which is central to our understanding of the purpose of our human lives, the role that we play in the universe, our place in the galaxy, all of those issues are fundamental issues that address the fundamental questions of what we refer to as spirituality. How did the universe come into existence? Is the universe unfolding towards some specific purpose that lends meaning to the universe? How did consciousness arise in an otherwise apparently non-sentient universe of matter, mass, and energy? And what are the faculties that our human species has by means of which we can possibly answer questions like that? These are all fundamental, profound philosophical and theological questions. We talked about that some this morning at our gathering. We'll talk about it more throughout the entire weekend, because the coming to grips with these fundamental questions is a call that has been issued now by the Jesuit order in the Catholic Church, the largest order and the largest single denomination in Western civilization, asking us all to come together as private citizens and laypersons to discuss this question as to what we believe the philosophical and theological implications to be of our actually having direct contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. Does that displace us from the role that we thought we played in the universe? Is there more that we can bring to a relationship with these other civilizations that can shed light on what we understand our relationship to be? And what do we have to learn from another civilization that may be literally millions of years in advance of us, technologically and intellectually? Might we still be equals of them in the spiritual realm? These are all fundamental questions that we're going to be talking about this weekend, and they begin to set the stage for the dialogue that we need to have as lay people, as people who have special spiritual gifts to bring to this discussion, or extraordinarily important experiences, personal experiences of some of the people that are here this weekend of actually having encountered extraterrestrial beings, to share with us what type of questions came up in their communications with these other beings about these fundamental spiritual questions. So this is a profoundly central question to this entire issue of extraterrestrial intelligence. And we have a panel here today of people that have important opinions about that, and they're here to share them with you this evening at the beginning of our gathering here together this weekend.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan Sheehan. I mean, I think part of it is the fact, and maybe Linda, you can talk about this idea of sentience. I mean, there are beings that are, you know, definitely more evolved on a mental, intellectual, intelligence level. They can see many dimensions at once, but the sense of consciousness, I mean, Grant Cameron, if he's here, talks about this idea of consciousness being the key. And so where does sentience and consciousness fit into this equal exchange that we have when we meet these EBINs, extra-biological entities?
So many times people have asked me, how could you go out into pastures by yourself and cut tissue and put it in formalin and get it back to scientists, and why wouldn't you be terrified? And when I think back to, you mentioned what happened to me in the mountains, and I'll just share the story because it goes to the heart of that question also about fear in the face of unknown extraterrestrials, other dimensionals, time travelers. I was 21 years old, and I was up in the mountains with my brother and cousin, and I had climbed a mountain because I liked to do that physical climbing and come down. And my brother was fishing and my cousin was reading, and I had gone up with the idea that I would get down in time for, they were going to cook dinner down at the river. And I was very familiar with this path and with this mountain in Johnson Creek in the, up in the Salmon River country of Idaho. And I remember that I had gotten up to this place that I like to go to look in a large vista, and I had turned around and started back. And I noticed the first thing were orange beams of light to my right coming down through the trees. Not exactly like sunlight. It was a very strange change in the atmosphere at that moment. And my last memory, clearly, was that I'm walking toward these orange beams of light with great curiosity. That's what I remember. What is this? When I felt like when 24 frames in a camera are run back at 96 and everything is moving in slow motion suddenly, and I remember that very clearly, but no fear. And then my next memory is that I'm down further in the mountain and I'm on a path, and it was June, and the summer flowers were beginning to come out. And I realized that along the path that there were flowers that were pulsing. They were pulsing light. They were brilliant white with orchid borders. And I had a reaction to seeing the flower pulsing in light to run to make everything go back to normal. Not out of fear, but out of a certain confusion of what is happening. And I ran and stopped, and then as far as I could see, all around me, all of the flowers were pulsing this bright, brilliant white light that had this orchid edge. And when I look back up now, the mountain, the sun had just gone down behind this big mountain. And for those of you who have ever seen the Van Gogh paintings in the last year of his life, and especially the Starry Night, and you see the energy doing this inside of a hill or a mountain, that's exactly what it looked like, but for real to my eyes. And the whole mountain seemed to be breathing. And there were 2 or 3 stars as the sun went down that came out, and now they're pulsing exactly like the flower. And I remember suddenly feeling like there was pressure and there was some kind of a temperature. And I had been standing there in awe of what is happening, but something raised my hands in front of me, and a thought voice came into my mind as I'm watching my hands rise up in front of me, and it said to me, "You are one with the light is one with you, and you are in the hands of God forever." And then while my hands are being kept in place, it was like a count of 10 to 1 that the whole pulsing light rheostated down to look normal. And as I stood there with my hands in front of me, this other thought came through my mind. This is what reality really is. That underneath every container body, every plant, every animal, every surface, whether it is this planet or a planet 13.9 billion light years from now, all of it, the reality has to do with pulsing light and energy, and what I came in my own mind after that to think of as the divine field. Not a building, not a religion, a divine field that is responsible for all matter worlds, no matter how many universes there are. And it has always been a solid ground in my life, that I could always stand on that ground in my mind, no matter what I was doing and no matter how bizarre whatever I encountered. And that is the way I feel about the non-humans. Whatever they are, whatever the agendas, whether positive or negative, to me, they are like having the surface of this reality lifted up for a while in those mountains in Idaho for me. And then when it was closed back down, you can't experience that without the rest of your life. You have that in everything you do. And suddenly things are not so scary, because in the end, I think that there is something true about it. And so when you ask the question, where is the bridge? Where is the union? Where do we get from where we are in a world that is now so disconnected and so harsh to what everybody would like, which is peace and life being cherished? We're on a planet where the life is not cherished. And if we made that transition, then how could non-humans be frightened?
Yeah, thank you, Linda. You also brought up the point of a kind of altered reality, a shift in consciousness that awakens, and sometimes it awakens when you're meeting these ETs. You're shifted in consciousness because they don't exist in the same field we exist in. So we shift, we kind of go into an altered state. And Dr. Dream, you work with that kind of stuff, don't you? Shifting people and getting into those states, and talk about your...
Yeah, this whole conversation for the panel has unfolded in a very interesting way for me. You started out by talking about DMT and being produced in our brains. And it immediately took me back to the fact that if it weren't for DMT and my experiences with this powerful teacher, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. That was my breaking open part of the experience. That opened me up to, I mean, I grew up Jewish in Omaha, Nebraska. I needed something really powerful to crack this one open. And there's a lot of truth in that. My parents were conservative, relatively conservative in this and that, and there wasn't yoga and meditation being done around me. And after well over 100 experiences with what I refer to as the others, the beings that I come into contact with in the DMT experience, my level of fear about what we will be encountering in the future is non-existent. I have no concerns about what the beings and what our experience will be. It is what it's done for me in my life and in my spiritual life, and what my life is about and my outreach is I'm not so focused on what I'm not experiencing right now. I'm not searching, I'm not calling forth contact with other beings. at this time, what I'm feeling is the most fertile opportunity is the inner journey. And so my experience at this time is taking everything in my outer experience of reality and bringing it back for me in the inner journey, and to learn my lessons and to assist me in expanding and moving more completely into the energies that you were talking about, cherishing and peace and everything like that. And to me, that's the greatest that I can do right now. And it's what keeps me, after all of these experiences that I've had completely out of this reality, and yet as solid and as real as I sit here right now, and as I touch your shoulder and I touch your knee. After all of that,
They know each other.
after all of that, it's really about how to stay grounded here. It's about how to expand into who I came here to be. And that's become my focus, and everything else that I encounter keeps bringing me back to that and allowing me to just completely and more fully expand into those energies. And as far as everything else, I'm open to contact, I'm open to all of it, and really having gone through a process of releasing ideas of what it may all be about and opening up to the true reality of what it is.
Thank you. Thank you. So Laura, how do you mix those realities, those inner realities of that piece that Dr. Dream talked about, with the idea that there's some harsh realities out there, and there's, also beautiful beings out there waiting to meet? How do you integrate that in your own mind, consciousness?
I think the harsh realities just help us to become stronger. I mean, every harsh reality I've ever been through has made me who I am today, and I love those experiences. I bless those experiences. I mean, if you look around, sometimes people who have it easy take it for granted, and they end up sort of crashing, or they end up misusing the power. And, coming into the Eisenhower family with maybe expectations that I might move into politics, I decided to go real deep and understand the nature of energy and learn from energy, and really get an idea of like where the energy is on the planet right now. And we're on a planet that's definitely very challenged. And the thing is, when we're born into a control system and we're limited, which we actually weren't when we were in these higher, more advanced civilizations with more DNA activated, we were 12-strand potential and beyond. We have those memories. Well, things changed. That's a long story. Those are my presentations. And now that we're experiencing a more limited version of ourselves, what we're really awakening to is really no big surprise. I think we're actually really comfortable with it. I think it makes us feel like relieved, like, thank God I didn't want to listen in school kind of thing. Like, thank God I didn't want to go to church, because I was really wondering, like, why, like, none of this was resonating. And I think we're really healing a lot of the stigmas and projections that come from being an expanded multidimensional being, because that's what we are. And I think in these times we're increasing our spirituality the more we discover what's out there. And it certainly does not negate there being a god or goddess or source energy. It's just we're in a multidimensional cosmos. There's like 7 universes or so. And there's a ton of beings. But we're in a free will universe, and it's a little bit different, because the founder races, who were bringing that energy of the intention of source through them to seed life in the time matrix, through free will, some of those entities decided to experiment a little bit with power, and the negative ego ended up emerging from the imbalance of the masculine and feminine as well. And so the harsh reality is us, really needing to look at ourselves. And I came in a very sensitive being with a very big open heart, and so I joke and say it's been a boot camp to learn how to be a real bitch. And I think for those that come in very cold and very closed off, their lessons might be about expansion and being warmer. But I think as individuals, we get exactly what we need. And so the harshness is that we're not going to walk away without gaining something immense and beautiful and enriching and meaningful. And we have to understand that the adversity is an incredible way to get there, because 2 people are going to experience something different. So where I might end up in a challenge because I might be vulnerable or open-hearted to people that probably don't deserve it. Somebody else might have a really strong boundary and never need to meet those people. So, or some people might refuse certain information that could really benefit them while others are all about it. So the harshness, to me, is like exercising a muscle. People volunteer for pain. They climb Mount Everest. We birth children. Actually, it shouldn't hurt as much as it does, but we're learning to get back into our divine feminine. But the thing is, when we sign up for pain, exercise and stretching our, boundaries to push the limit, we're totally fine with it. We know it makes us strong. But when it comes at us out of left field and we feel like we didn't invite it, then it feels like a violation. And that's something we need to, understand. What are the deeper reasons and what do we need to do? Where do we need boundaries and where do we need openness? And nobody can make those decisions for you but you. And to me, oneness is diversity and harmony, and we have to learn to respect each other's individual paths, where we are on our path, and just allow ourselves to have an open experience so that when the harsh realities show up, we have somebody to hug, we have a hand to hold, we have the support from each other, and we can share the gifts, the wisdom, and the knowledge, because somebody else might have something that we can gain from, and somebody could really assist us. And so to me right now, we're in a major rehabilitation. We're moving out of a lot of trauma and pain as a human race that we've disguised with attachments that are unhealthy and addictions, and really being plugged into the matrix and avoiding ourselves and letting somebody else run the show. And those days are over. And so harshness is now turning into the diamond body, and it's turning into the rainbow body, and it's turning into what this level of pressure and adversity creates when we're open to the miracles and the blessing of what it truly means.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, that's great. Bashar says this is your last chance for pain, okay? So we're coming, it doesn't get any denser than this. So get it while you can, because we're moving on. We're moving up. So for James, I know you've already integrated that. You live in a sort of integrated world where the physical realities are the spiritual realities. Can you talk about that?
Actually, I don't know anything. I'm just sitting here holding space.
Okay, that's good. That's very spiritual.
I'm wondering why everybody else is here. What are you guys doing here? But it's always not been about me. It's been about the people, and I kind of see you like the ETs see you. You're the forgotten gods. It's like you all came from the source, and that was your original beginning, and then you drop down through all the dimensions to get to here. So you've already done all these other things. You've been all these Andromedans and Pleiadians and the Orion Council of Light Beings, and some of you were felines, some of you were lion beings, humanoid lion beings. It's all in our history. And we've all done this, but we think we're a personality in a body, but we're this vast being, that multidimensional being, once we get past the personality in the body. So what happened to me, I had to die to figure this out. I had a couple near-death experiences, and I crossed over and I went through the tunnel, and I ended up in that plane of bliss and met some wonderful beings there. And the door has been open ever since. But it's allowed me to go forward or backward in time, and also I can read other people's books, and I look at people and I see who you are. I see where you've been, and I can see there's so much more to you than you've figured out yet. Some of you have figured it out, but it's I'm all here about awakening people to their own divinity and that multidimensional divinity, and we are these vast multidimensional beings, and we exist on a vibrational continuum. And once you kind of get out of this little meat suit here and start going up the levels, you start realizing that you have friends and family in other realms, and the other amazing civilizations out there that are coming here right now to help us. And I'm all about planetary liberation, and that's what we're in the middle of right now. And we have the ancient Anunnaki, the benevolent ones, are back. They've returned, and they've brought the lion beings with them.
And you have a message from the lion beings, right?
I actually have a recording of the lion beings if you all wanted to hear it.
Yeah.
They want to hear it. Let's see if we can cue this up. But,
Did they do this special for contact, your lion friends?
yeah, what happened was they came over 3 phones at the same time. Somebody was recording a Christmas song, and they came over her phone, and she was a lawyer for the Cherokee Nation and the Hawaiian Nation. We were working with the Shaka movement to kind of get rid of the GMOs and things over in Maui. And another friend of mine, Miles, that came over his phone too at the same time. And I was talking to my sister, and it came over my phone. Well, we got a recording in it. And I want to warn you, this is a 17-foot tall being. He's very deep. His voice is very deep. It's kind of foreboding. It's very benevolent. Get out of fear, drop into your heart, and you'll feel the energy. And it's a language we'd never heard before. And he also purrs. He starts purring as he's talking through the. And so
these are the lion beings, you said? Lion?
They're feline beings, and they, like Sekhmet and Narisha in India, they were the protectors of the gods. They've been around forever, and now they're back.
Okay.
And they're here to protect the forgotten gods, which is you, if you want to attune to them. So we'll go ahead and play this.
I think there is a change in awareness among many of the people, not so much in a lot of other people. But one of the things that's driving this change is that we're reinventing our technology, our way of communicating with each other in the world. We're already now officially seeing the beginnings of quantum computing. Where that's going to lead in the next decade or two is going to be an amazing thing. Advanced artificial intelligence is right around the corner, advanced nanotechnology. Advanced 3D printing. There are a number of things here that are going to be giving people tremendous amounts of power that could be really decisive in the relationship with the formal power structure. As I see it, nothing's given. We're not definitely headed toward utopia, but we could be headed for a better world. We could be headed for a worse world. It's a race, as I see it, between a kind of encroaching global totalitarianism on the one hand, and the real possibility of freedom on the other.
Yeah, Michael, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, the fact that I mentioned that we are more enslaved now than ever before, it's a recognition of it, so it's a good thing.
Yeah.
We're recognizing that this is happening, and with that recognition comes a recognition of what it is we're supposed to do. Okay. And that's the aha moment that all of us, I believe, are experiencing to some extent or another.
Yeah, Linda.
And the force of Earth changes alone may literally define what the non-humans and the human governments are going to be able to do or not do, because for those of you who have heard my presentations about the sounds that may be related to changes in the core that could lead to a pole flip, the consequences of a magnetic pole shift could be quite serious, because if the magnetic field goes down towards zero and stays there as it did in the last one, unstable for 2,000 years, once a magnetic field goes down near zero, then more solar radiation, more gamma rays from the cosmos reach the surface of the Earth. And we know that that kills life. That would kill humans to a certain degree, and animals and plants. And right now, what is beginning to be discussed in scientific papers is this is the century that for the first time in 786,000 years, the North Pole will end up in the Antarctic if this happens, and the South Pole will end up in the Arctic, and that there will be a period of great instability in the magnetic field of this planet leading up to, that's now. And so, if we are headed into that kind of unpredictable and uncontrollable change, then depending upon what governments and non-humans, whatever their relationship is, they either may be forced out into the open because humans are really going to need a lot of help, or they will choose to keep everything silent and a policy of denial right up to the last second.
Besides that, I think this vibrational change, this shift, this increased solar radiation might have a positive effect where more people are waking up because of the subtle influences. And there's more in the movie Solar Revolution. They say more DMT is being released in the brain, which is making us more of a visionary culture. So in the right degree of this cosmic radiation action, it could be, and I've seen it, and more people are waking up to a spiritual reality. And it's because our brains are awakening, that's what I feel, to a higher level. Do you think so, Victoria?
I believe that we are actually awakening different parts of the brain that we've never used before. I mean, remember, what do we use? What, 4% or something ridiculous? Does anybody know? Right, around approximately that much of the brain. So what's going on with the rest of it, right? So this is what I feel, is I'm seeing every day ordinary individuals out there suddenly knowing before the telephone rings, suddenly knowing before someone comes in the door, suddenly having dreams of what their future is going to be, suddenly realizing, coming to the realization that this reality that we're looking at right now really isn't what we thought it really was. It's like a dream. And when we break through this dream, we'll dream of yet another one. It's almost like another hologram, and it goes on and it goes on. But eventually we do come to the point where we realize and recognize that we're coming from a super intelligence. And we're sitting in this massive sea of love intelligence from which we've come, and as we awaken, we become part of that, and we get to choose what kind of reality we want to live.
Yeah. Do you see that, Don? I mean, you're coming from the MUFON angle, but do you see, from your perspective, I'm not saying you should.
Actually, I don't come from MUFON.
Oh, you don't?
I come from the QFOs.
Oh, QFON, yeah. QFOs. Dr. Hynek, J. Allen Hynek, really one of the guys. But you see, because that's a practical approach, and then there's been mixing in with the more of a consciousness thing. Do you get what we're trying to say here?
I mean, certainly we've observed it over the last 3 days here.
Yeah. You
But
got that.
we also have seen that people have been walking around texting and not talking on their cells 24 hours a day.
Well, that's non-local
We'll go
communication.
back home, and I'm afraid that I'm going to again be smacked with reality because people are completely caught up as extensions of their machines. And as a result, I mean, now we're talking about cars that are going to drive themselves. Okay. Everything is being taken away from us that we don't even have to process or think about anything any longer.
Well, it's like fire. It has a good side and a bad side.
And
It's
to me,
technology.
this is what I feel we need to resist.
Okay.
Because as human beings, we are all unique. We all have something to offer to one another, and we're all here to basically help one another get through this life, which isn't as pleasant as we would like to believe it is.
But it can be. We are
It
living,
certainly, and that's when we worked as this event this weekend is with evidence.
Yeah.
That when we share this common bond.
Linda had a quick question.
But there really is a danger to follow up what Don is saying. Ex Machina, how many people have seen Ex Machina? Not many, I'm surprised. It's quite an extraordinary film, not great, but the warning is the same warning that Bill Gates and Musk and Hawking are giving, that humans are right now on the brink of making intelligent robots that would basically, if they are successful, the benchmark would be that they would act like humans. And this Ex Machina Hollywood feature film really has parts of it that illustrate why they are warning, because there are tremendous amounts of dangers that could be coming in a world where, just exactly as Don has said, that the machines and the robots and the AI will become increasingly used and depended upon. And what will humanity do unless there is a gigantic acceleration to the curve of teaching humans more skills? And the disconnect between the AI world and the San Jose world is now so huge in the United States
that it is now a huge social and political problem.
But we're learning more skills, things like remote viewing, things like sensing. I think these are attributes and human qualities are becoming online for a lot of us. Psychic perception. What were you going to say, Michael?
Well, I was going to just add to that, to what Linda was saying, learning more skills. To do that, we need to change the education system, unfortunately, and that comes into the heart of what I talk about and teach. Those that are interested in what we do, is until we change the education system, which is also created by design, as you know, by the banking families. The current education system is nothing other than creating a future labor force. It's got nothing to do with teaching skills for life. So if we need to teach ourselves and our children skills for lives, get your children out of school. Stop sending your children to these prison camps. They're going to turn them into what we are, and 20 years from now, they're going to be sitting here debating the same crap that we're debating today.
Well, that's about teaching them new skills. And why don't you talk about your experience with Joe Dispenza and opening up the brain and connect? What?
You were talking about schools and stuff. You know, I have a daughter that is just a genius, super genius. I mean, she was asking, Mom, at about 6 years old, Mom, what would happen if there was no time? And I'm looking down there and I'm like, whoa. I sent her to school, to film school. Now, understand, this is a kid. I got her a really nice camera and everything, and she was running around at like 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old. She's doing it, right? She's running around shooting everything. I sent her to school where they teach you, you've got to wait. You've got to wait till you're finished with school. You got to hold back, hold back, hold back. And what ended up happening is that these kids programmed their brains. They hardwire themselves for 4 years straight. That's like being a depressed individual for 4 years, constantly depressed. And all of a sudden that depression becomes a natural state to them. And then what happens is the body starts memorizing that natural state. And they, even if they wanted to wake up one day and say, I don't want to be depressed anymore, their body's already memorized it and said, hey, wait a minute. You break it by shutting down 3 parts of the brain and going into the frontal lobe. And this is where we're all going now. I believe that there is a chance. And how you do that is it has to do with spatial and meditation. And they teach it. There's a wonderful author. His name is Dr. Joe Dispenza. And he goes into all of this. And if any of you are interested. But seriously, I saw it with my daughter. You were right. She lost it. Now she's trying to climb back in. And although she's worked for all these big, places, she wanted to go out on her own to do it. Where she did it before, she didn't. She stopped. And now it's working for company.
Yeah, school should be exciting.
It should be. I mean, this weekend was exciting for me. The information, right? It made me real. And the film last night, Packing for Mars, there's an exciting universe out there waiting for us. It really, really is exciting. And to get beyond the imprisonment and the enslavement and to open up and awaken humanity and the cosmos that's waiting for us, we're coming into, I think, the greatest time ever. And I do...
But what does it say when Stephen Hawking now predicts that the only way man is going to survive on this planet is to evacuate over the next 100 years?
I'd rather talk to Danny Sheehan with the next octave of worldview and tell us what that looks like as we go into the new worldview.
Well, that actually, as we're going to be talking about tomorrow morning, that the new paradigm that a lot of people are talking about right now has to do with the evolution of this 6th new faculty that our human family has. This faculty that's able to directly and immediately experience the unitive phenomenon that bonds the entire universe together in a harmonious whole. That is the underlying experience that is now rising into the fore. What we need to do is to get in behind that particular process, affirm it, and basically not be ignorant about what the other dynamics are that are going on in the world, but just to atrophy them by staying in the affirmative vision of what it is that we're doing and opening up this new worldview. But we need to understand, there is yet an 8th paradigm worldview that is going to be coming up, which after we have direct open contact with the extraterrestrial civilization, are able to travel freely back and forth with their civilization and try to understand what they have come to understand and integrate that. There's an entire other worldview that is beyond the event horizon still to us, And so there's a lot of excitement to go in the human family. And when we finally open up, as I mentioned, that 8th chakra above our head, that we may discover that chakra is synonymous with the root chakra of the whole next octave of being. And that there may be extraterrestrial civilizations that abide at that particular vibrational frequency. So this is going to be very exciting, getting to actually meet and deal with these folks. And it's just beginning right now. This is a very exciting period in our human family, just beginning to encounter both the rise of this new sixth faculty and the contacts that are now being talked about more openly with all the extraterrestrials. It's a very exciting time, I think.
I call it the flowering, thank you, the flowering of humanity. I see us awakening to who we really are. I mean, Richard, when you wrote AD and the consequences of coming forward with what Danny just mentioned, if you can just skip all those pages about the confusion, all that disruption, because it's already happening. The institutions we've created, medicine has been in the way of healing, and religion is in the way of spirituality. All the old institutions are in the way of the things they were created for, and that's part of what the UFO issue is bringing down, I think, in these old situations. But this new world, the new world view that Danny's talking about, after AD, after all the confusion of that comes forward and is settled, where are we then in your
Well, I found that very intriguing, Danny. I enjoyed hearing what you had to say on that. I would only add, though, before we get to a place like that, we have some serious institutional obstacles to deal with. We're at a point in the world right now where the 80 wealthiest people in the world own as much wealth as the bottom 50% of humanity, where those individuals are trying to buy up all the water, all the minerals, all the genetically modified foods that they want to shove down your throat, and they want to own it all, and they're moving toward that. So it's a war. They're declared war really on the rest of humanity, and they want to own everything, including the people. And we have to find a way of dealing with that. Now, if spiritual evolvement by all the people on the planet does that, well, then great. But there's a lot of people in this world who are in grinding poverty, who are in misery and are being exploited. And we have some serious work cut out for us in the material realm right here. And then, dealing with other beings from other places, which I think most of us feel that is the case, that they're here. And as Stanton Friedman's pointed out many times, why would they want to deal with us when our main occupation is tribal warfare, and our main economic activity is creating war machines to kill each other? If I'm paraphrasing you more or less accurately, Stan, we have to transform that whole system. Otherwise, I don't really see much of a point in having a relationship with anyone else when we're destroying each other. And I will just say I have one point of being uncomfortable with some. I mean, I'm very, very interested in let us say consciousness studies, but I become a little bit unsettled by it when I feel that there's a movement away from the political. So
one of the great advantages that I might point out that I have is that that's what I've spent my entire life doing. I mean, I didn't represent the New York Times to get the Pentagon Papers published because I was trying to entertain.
I get that.
People. What I'm saying is that I'm fully cognizant of all of these challenges, and that's one of the reasons that I feel that at this particular point in our human development, that it's possible for me to come forward to try to share with you the reasons why we should be optimistic, because I don't have any doubt that everybody knows that I know everything in spades that can be said this bad about our human family.
Well, I was certainly not accusing you, Dan, of being utopian.
No.
But I just feel like it's a tendency that we all have to watch for. There's a tendency in our culture to want to see everything as a happy ending, and the fact is, it could go either way. It really doesn't have to be a happy ending. It could be. For it to make it a happy ending, we have to do a lot of work. That's all I'm saying.
I personally feel that you can create your own reality. I'm sorry. I just feel that, because I experience it in my own life. You can't, you're a reflection of my mind. I'm a reflection of your own. So I know that in my heart, if I can raise my frequency to a certain thing, there are things that may exist for other people, pain, agony, and all that, but if I truly live in a certain frequency, I can resist it in a way that it doesn't really, it's not empowered.
But there's still war out there.
Oh, absolutely. We're not negating those things. I'm just talking about my relationship to it and how it affects me emotionally. That's what I'm just saying.
And I think if we raise ourselves, it'll still exist, those things. If we raise ourselves up and I think come from a more uplifting place, it helps. It may be, we still have to do the hard work, feed the people, and the
We
wars.
still have to confront evil.
Yeah.
We still have to deal with it. That's the thing. And I agree with Victoria that our way of thinking, our minds, do create the kinds of individuals that we will be. The way we think about ourselves is critically important. I'm just saying there's a danger, and I think really we have to be aware of this if we're going to be honest with ourselves, which is that we can think all we want about raising our frequency, but there's still going to be 80 people in this world who are going to try to buy up everything that's worth owning. They're still going to try to keep us as a slave race.
Well,
and we have to do something about that.
Well, we are. I hope. Yeah. Well, I think we are.
So to add to what Richard is saying, that's exactly what I deal with, I guess, on a daily basis in South Africa. Dealing with people who live in absolute poverty, they have nothing, but that doesn't mean they're stupid. But that also doesn't mean they're highly conscious and highly spiritual. Mm-hmm. They just know that something is wrong and they want out of this misery and out of this situation. What they respond to very positively is not spiritual teachings, because they're not really wired to receive spiritual messages. They need help. They need to know that they get a loaf of bread and have a meal at the end of the day. Right. So you've got to balance this very, very carefully. You've got to continue on the spiritual path and the path of consciousness, but at the same time you've got to deal with the hard day-to-day facts of people's survival on all levels. And unfortunately, as Richard said, these 80 people that want to buy up and own the whole world, they own the whole world. They don't want to buy it, they own the whole planet already.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as long as we have this thing called money in our existence, they're going to continue owning the whole world. So there's a series and sequence of events that need to happen here. We need to disempower them by stop allowing them to use this, or by stop using the money that they're using to buy up the whole world, which gives them the power, creating a new alternative for humanity, for the people, which is what we're doing with the Ubuntu movement, but at the same time giving the people on the ground the good news that there is a way out. And I am right at the cutting edge of this every day, where hundreds of people in our town are waking up and realizing that there is a way out, and this is spreading like wildfire to our neighboring towns, where into running up to next year's local elections, people are suddenly realizing that there is hope, that we can get out of this. And it comes back to what Richard was saying, the political solution. You're not going to do this by creating ground movements and singing Kumbaya around a bunch of trees. You're going to do it by doing that at the same time by creating a political alternative. So from the top down and from the bottom up. And I can see this happening on a daily basis, providing real solutions and answers to people that know they're going to have a loaf of bread at the end of the day. And they're going to move away from the slavery system, from understanding that the government is not their friend, that they're actually trying to keep them there, and giving them the way out of that misery. And it's happening and working so well. It's blowing my mind, actually.
Well, thank you for doing. Don, you have something to add?
Okay. There's one thing we haven't mentioned. There are many things we haven't mentioned, but I'm concerned about when we talk about dealing with, negotiating with, whatever you want to call it, with other civilizations. We still live on a planet in which there is no government that wants its citizens to owe their allegiance to the planet. That's the way we are. Our nationalism is the only game in town. And yes, the 80 rich guys get by that to some extent. But, do you know of any country that wants its people to be as concerned about the planet as they are about their own country?
But that's changing. Environmentally,
is it really?
I think a lot more people are aware that we're one planet, and that pollution doesn't exist just over a country.
Who speaks for the planet? Who is able to negotiate for the planet in dealing with aliens?
I think all of us. All of us. What were you going to say, Don? We'll get back to...
I don't mean to keep sounding
as
though I'm playing devil's advocate, but even on what Stan just said, this idea that we have this trickle-down effect as far as from the media, and being told only what they want us to know. And I often refer to the media that everything is scripted, as though the whole world has become professional wrestling. And I think back to when we were on Montel Williams at one time, and all he kept asking pertaining to the UFO situation was, well, how does that put meat on my plate? That he just couldn't think beyond, today. The idea that anything that would expand his horizons, his concept of his own world, let alone the universe, he just could not comprehend. And I'm personally afraid that's still the majority of people in this world.
Yeah, but if we're confronted, like a lot of people, with this phenomena up close, I think it changes people's ideas of their relationship to their country and the world.
If they have the access to the truth, and that's where, unfortunately, in relying to the media, most people still depend on them for their daily dose of reality.
But this is grassroots here. There's what, 2,500 people there this weekend, something like that? It's growing. The grassroots movement is growing. But let me just change gears for one quick second. And or did you have something to say about that? Because I wanted to talk to you, Stanton Friedman. You've been doing this for how long? 60?
Gave my first lecture in 1967.
1967. Now
48 years.
40. What? Yeah. Maybe you'll get next year's Lifetime Achievement Award, right?
I've had a couple.
What is the passion in you? What is it that kept you going for all these years? And you're still going. You're still as passionate today as when you began, I'm sure, however long ago that was, 67. What is your passion?
My passion is because I am influenced by my children to be looking toward the future for them, a better world for my great-grandson, for example. And they just visited, and it's kind of a powerful recognition when you see a 7-year-old, what kind of a world will he grow up in? And I've always been convinced that knowledge is better than ignorance, but that, it's a trite phrase. Have facts in hand before putting mouth in gear. And so I was a high school debater. I learned that you don't mess with the truth. I've debated on Coast to Coast and won. I know that may not be too difficult considering the opponents, but what I'm saying is I find that people are turned on by the truth, but you got to show them. You can't just tell them. And I have been very pleased on certain occasions when somebody in the audience says after my lecture, how about polling this audience? I had shown some Gallup poll data. And I said, well, I don't usually ask my audience to stick their necks out. That's my job. Well, I don't think anybody will mind. Everybody clapped, so we did that. Better than 90% of that audience agreed that some UFOs are extraterrestrial spacecraft. 90%. This is after I gave them a long lecture, of course. But still, what I'm saying is people can be reached with facts and with data. But the kicker is, what do we do about it? This is where governments get into the act. On two different levels. The government's got all the equipment for making good measurements of UFO characteristics. Radar, spy satellites, gun cameras, etc. That all belongs to the government. And they're perfectly free to do what they please with the data. But what has changed is that people are now ready to say, hey, gee, I don't think we're the only ones around. A lot of people said that. Very important people said that 100 years ago, 50 years ago. This is the only solar system there is. We're the only planet that has actively thinking, building people today. That's it. Aren't we great? Now I hear over and over again from young people, surely we're not the only ones around. And surely we're not the best ones around. And gee, what an exciting time to be alive when we recognize that there's more out there than what we can see here. But how to get from here to there that $1 trillion military budget this year beats the heck out of doing anything useful about this kind of thing. And we're the courageous schools of journalism. Linda, you run into their products. Is anybody doing anything to change that? You know, take an oath of allegiance to the truth for every journalist. That'll be the day. Yeah.
But you know, Stanton, you're an example of being empowered, not being stopped. You keep going. You keep putting it out there, and more people are waking up because you've talked on every university in the country about this. No, really, you've tirelessly been there, giving people the truth. And because of you, I would say some people here, a lot of people have woken up to that truth.
Well, I hope so. But
yeah.
There's a lot more to be done, and we need more people doing it.
Yeah, Linda, were you going to say something? Because I also, well, what I was trying to get at with this question is that the passion in these panelists and all of us for the truth is what's driving this sort of greater consciousness to arrive here. So I'm just curious in that. In what, you know, like, Don, you've been on the Roswell case for years and years. It's nonstop, new piece of information comes. But what is it? What is that? What awakens in you when you hear that truth about Roswell, for instance?
Well, especially in my case, starting out as a skeptic.
Oh.
And with the full acceptance or the confidence that a single trip to New Mexico would wrap this up in a single weekend.
When was that?
What an optimist.
And that was after Stan had encouraged me that there were still hundreds of witnesses left to track down and interview.
And I couldn't afford to do it.
I couldn't either, but thanks for that.
So Stan told you to go to Roswell.
No, but I mean, I had approached him about whether he had felt that they had taken the case as far as they could. If they interviewed all of the potential witnesses that could potentially break this wide open. And I approached him as a skeptic.
You said, like, thinking not just a skeptic, but a non-believer, saying there's nothing to this.
Not a non-believer as much as I wanted the facts, I wanted the evidence to lead us to whatever the final solution would be. Mm-hmm. And it's when you speak to the first-hand witnesses, especially of a case of this nature, and they're able to talk beyond just a fleeting light through the sky or a photograph, or something that may have touched down on the ground, and they start talking about, as Stan had the wonderful experience of speaking with the late Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer of the 509th Bomb Group, and to listen to the people who, as far as totally describe precisely what he did. The memory material, paper-thin material that you couldn't scratch, you couldn't bend, and yet other materials that you could crumble and crease and lay down onto a smooth surface and would flow like water. We don't even have such material by today's standards that right before your eyes such a demonstration could take place. And it quickly makes you realize that you still may be correct in your initial assessment, that it may be something prosaic, but you don't take the chance that you may be totally wrong and you just drop the ball. So you have to go back and go back and go back and go back until the case demonstrates before yourself as well as your colleagues that it's more than just a balloon.
Right, so where was that moment that where it clicked for you and we went from skeptic to say, oh my God, this is something here?
When the very rancher's son, Bill Brazo Jr., sitting with his wife, Shirley, and her describing how every night he would come home working the ranch and reach into his leather chaps and pull out this piece of shiny metal. And she would watch how he would try to carve on it and poke his pocket knife through it and hold his lighter up to it. Nothing have any effect. And then she would watch as he would wad it up into a ball and then place it onto the table, and it would just flow, smooth right out. And then he would just sit there and smile and looked at us and said, yeah, some kind of weather balloon, wasn't that?
Linda, yeah, thank you, Don.
In addition to hard physical evidence, like in the animal mutilations and crop formations and other phenomena, the one thing that I think over the years of my career that has kept me going are the people who have served in military or police or some service authority or even some of the intelligence agencies, and they come forward because they are so angry. And they are angry because once upon a time when they became a military person and they were fighting or working for their country, and then they end up being involved in an encounter with something that falls into the extraterrestrial category, and then somebody is standing in front of them and telling them, you keep your mouth shut, you never saw this. If you utter a word from now to the day you die, your family will lose pension. And I have seen so much of that. And then what I and others become, we are then the translator for people who have sought us out to tell us the truth about what had happened. And in their anger over being forced by lies and being forced by Alice in Wonderland in 1984 Newspeak that nothing exists that they know, it gets especially, I think, to the heart and the soul of an American. And that we are still at a time when those of us who were raised from the 40s, 50s, 60s, when the United States stood for a government of, by, and for the people, that when you get into the investigations of everything related to extraterrestrial and technology, it is a completely different government. It is a government of control and lies and policies of denial and black budgets.
Yeah.
And what you begin to realize is we came out of World War II as the 800-pound gorilla on this planet, and we were looked at with respect. And yet, the irony is, out of that exact same war came all of these corrupting policies of denial and lies about extraterrestrials, because maybe they were super patriotic decisions in the beginning. The world's not ready. But it moved very quickly to, we will get all of this technology, we will shoot down the craft that we can, we will get them into American corporations, we will back engineer this technology, trillions of dollars will be made by corporations, and we will have the weapons of the world instead of, we are not alone, non-humans are interacting with the planet, and out of World War II, this government in England, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada could have been honest with the whole world and pulled the rug out from under the Nazis.
I think that's what we're correcting here. Richard.
Yeah, I'm really glad Linda brought these points up, because that was really wonderful, Linda. You know, my very first book wasn't titled UFOs. It was titled UFOs and the National Security State. I wrote this, it finished it a year before 9/11. And when I look at it, I'm actually proud of the fact that I had that title before 9/11. I feel like I was onto something. The relationship of the UFO phenomenon to the American government in particular was really my theme in that book. And you know, what you find is that the American government's reaction to the UFO problem of the 1940s has really been one of the key things that has damaged this country. It's not the only thing, but it is an important thing that's been very damaging to our political system. And it is one of the key formations of what we call our black budget. Not the only, but an important one. If you recover technology, exotic technology at Roswell, and I believe elsewhere, you need, from their point of view, a highly classified and expensive program to fund it. You can't just get that from ordinary tax dollars. You've got to classify that. You have to do an end run around the Constitution, and you're basically destroying your country in order to maintain this secrecy. So in other words, you know, in dealing with the absolute reality of this phenomenon, and there's, by the way, if no one is familiar with this, there's an overwhelming abundance of documentary evidence discussing how military personnel have encountered these things, and they've found them baffling, and they've found them, took them seriously. That's an open and shut case. That's a real thing. We have thousands of pages of documents through the Freedom of Information that prove this. They don't suggest it, they prove it. So that phenomenon's real, and the response to this has been a very corrosive influence on the American Republican system, and really, by extension, on the global political system, because the Americans dominate it. So, really, in ending the secrecy on this topic, whether or not our civilization's ready for it, to me, the most important thing is not even the scientific benefits or the even the consciousness benefits that might accrue or the opening of our culture. The real benefit of ending secrecy is reclaiming, or at least attempting to reclaim, some semblance of a true Republican free system based on liberty of individuals and openness of government. That's what it's about for me.
Is that what drives?
Yeah, it's a liberation movement to the truth about ETs, is liberate humanity.
That is, we are part of a liberation movement. I think people here who know that, what can they do? What do you suggest? I mean, what does anyone suggest? Okay, we know, most everyone here, that something exists, and it's not our little bubble. We're not going to take this bubble with us out into... I feel we can do something. I don't know what that is.
I would say a couple of things we can do. One is we can educate ourselves as well as we can. It's hard work, but there are good sources of information on this. It's good for all of us to know them. We're in a point in our culture now where things like YouTube affect millions and millions of people. So there's a lot of great ways for people to learn about this. And the other thing we can do, in addition to being knowledgeable, is to be brave in our personal lives. And you know, once we leave this area here, you go out and you do everything that you can bravely. Don't worry about it. If people don't accept you, so what? Most people don't understand their own situation in life or themselves, much less you. So really, if they're negative about you, just take it in stride. I think what we have to do is be brave and go out there and with knowledge help spread the word.
Or even just personal contact. I mean, how many people have had some sort of contact experience here? And are you...
Audiences can become black.
I know, but are you willing to share that in a way that maybe people will believe you or not? She's shaking her head. Yeah, I think she already has.
Great.
So,
you know what?
Keep doing it.
I'd like to say, Alan, is one of the things that I'm a little afraid of is that events like this become anxious about trying to convince people and convince the outside world that are not here about all these events.
I know about convincing. If you just share your experience.
Exactly. So what happens here should not be an attempt at trying to convince others that, look, there are aliens, they've been here, stop, don't do that.
No, but
you don't have to be an evangelist.
If people have seen something...
You don't have to be afraid to talk.
If people had an experience, then I think
so let me complete my statement.
Yeah.
We should avoid trying to desperately to convince others, but go out there and tell your truth. Tell what you know and let the people decide whether they think you're a crank or whether you're a really smart guy who's seen something and wants to share the truth and the information with the world. This knowledge and information, as some of the panelists here have mentioned, between 60 and 90% of the population believe that we're not alone. So you don't have to convince anybody. It's just larger numbers of people need to get together and share their information and let these kind of gatherings become the main stream and not the fringe. And the more we do this, the more this is going to become the mainstream and no longer the fringe. In fact, I believe it is already the mainstream.
Right.
And the only thing that we don't perceive it to be the mainstream is because it's not in the mainstream media. But if you actually look at who's really watching the mainstream media, are the porridge eaters, as Louise likes to call them, who are the people that need to be informed and woken up. And it is then our duty to go and do that job.
Exactly.
But do it gently. Yes. Don't scare them.
No. Linda.
And reinforcing all of this, I see it every week in the work that I do at Earth Files and for Coast and Dreamland and all of the radio that I do. I get so much feedback from people who will email or phone and say, I heard you on the radio, or I saw you on television, or you had somebody on who said X, and I've never told anyone this before, but after hearing that story, I want you to at least know. And out of 10 of those, maybe 5 will be willing to go on the record and tell theirs. And it really is a pollination that gets feedback, just because more people now are more willing to go on the record, and I'm seeing a change. They are willing to go on the record with their names. It used to be nobody would let
How
their
many
names.
times have people said to you, "This, I've never told anyone this before"?
Oh, hundreds.
Hundreds.
Same here.
Same with you.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, Danny, when John Mack put his career on the line by saying abduction is not a psychosis, and Harvard wanted to fire him for that, what do you think that did when he, in a sense, legitimized this movement? There's something changed, I think, at that moment with John Mack.
Well, it was
for us.
As I say, it was an extremely interesting point in time because people tend to view Harvard University as being representative of a certain kind of authority in the culture. And for them to have dug in the way they did and try to insist that their scientific, logical, positivist, materially grounded reality was all there was, and that anybody who tried to even open a dialogue or ask questions about other dimensions of reality, other aspects of reality, some other potential worldview, it became obvious to John that this was representative of a major doorway for our human family to actually cross into this other realm. And as I've indicated before in some of my talks here, that's what's now being recognized, that this reaching out and establishing contact with another extraterrestrial civilization is going to have an absolutely inevitable impact upon the worldview of our people. And the simple question is, and we keep on encountering it here in our panel, is whether or not we're going to sit around and wait for the government to tell us it's true, drip by drab, or whether the church is going to tell you it's true or not. The key is for us to reach out, cross that line, and it's a very personal thing. Is are you going to be willing to go out and stand beneath the stars and actually reach out and try to communicate with these beings? Instead of saying, "Oh, it's really interesting, isn't this an interesting feeling I get when I see the stars?" But to step through the threshold and reach out to communicate telepathically with these beings and participate in this process. That's the key. This is as I said this morning, this is a citizens' diplomacy undertaking here. And we need to cross through and do this. And as I say, it's not to ignore the fact that there's an established order that's trying to hold on to the woodwork, basically, so they can maintain control over the resources of the world. But the fact of the matter is that with this new worldview that's coming into place now, which is integrally related to this existence of this extraterrestrial civilization, it's a dimension of truth. It's a dimension of truth that is knocking right on the door, that's hovering right off stage. It's ready to happen, and we need to participate actively in making it happen. And I can tell you, I'm convinced that these sinful structures, these structures of injustice that we've been talking about, will start to atrophy, because you can actually direct our attention toward growing a new world. Not having to be attached to the old world, and that there are some tactical steps, by all means, that need to be taken in this process. But once you make the strategic decision, then the tactical decisions will follow after it. And that's what we have to do, I believe.
No, I agree, and I think we're so, thank you, Dan, and I think this question of this passionate movement is that, in a sense, we're so into this that we maybe have perhaps forgotten that the ET recognition that we're connected to something bigger is the momentous point in human history. I mean, and that changes everything. It's a total game changer. Richard, you've talked, and I think because we're so used to this, that the idea that this is real, we forget perhaps how big a game changer that is.
I felt for a while we're at an interesting interim moment in our history of our species, our civilization. I mean, think of it this way: there's almost certainly, I think, been visitation or presence of these other beings probably for a really, really, really long time. And for most of that time, I'm guessing that they've had a much easier go at it. If someone 500 years ago in any part of the world were to see what we would consider a UFO or another being, what would they really be able to do about it? Not a whole lot. It might be something to go into an oral history tradition, or might get written down in a chronicle. But in the last century, look what human civilization's been able to do. We've taken to the air, we've developed radio and television and rocketry and some serious weapons and electronic means of detection, and now we're into advanced computing and quantum computing. I mean, we're just going up on an literally an exponential level. And so what that means is that the, let's call it the advanced guard of our civilization in terms of technology, I'm talking about the military-industrial complex, they've become aware that there is this definite presence. That's not a question for them. And what they're trying to do, this is why we're at an interim, they're trying to hold that knowledge back from the rest of the world.
Right, only for so long.
Right, only for so long, because the rest of the world is, I mean, fast becoming quite aware that, oh, indeed, there's this other presence as well. So I think at some point, this is just going to end. And it's just going to be, everyone's going to become aware of this.
And I think, you know, you just have to dig a little bit on the internet. Anyone who doesn't believe this, just tell them to look up UFOs. But
everything's happened so fast in the last really 20 years.
And the internet
and where will we be in another 20?
Right, so we are connected as a global mind, a global community, but this idea of finally this truth coming forward, in your books, you talk about how it then totally rearranges the human psyche, in a sense. And
our interaction with this phenomenon, you know, Jacques Vallée wrote about this many years ago. I certainly wasn't the first person, but excuse me, our interaction with this phenomenon has had a tremendous transformation of our society, and is continuing to work us in ways that I think only in the distant future we'll be able to look back and say, ah, yes, this is how it's happened. But our interaction with them not only has affected our popular culture, but has affected our scientific culture in terms of classified technologies, and has affected the relationship of us to government, government to us. And it's been very, very transformative in positive and in dark ways as well. Not necessarily from them, but in terms of our reaction. But we're not done. The whole process isn't done yet. And so we've got more transformations to take place. But this has been a very important part. Yeah. And other historians and other analysts, at some point, they need to start looking at this and seeing how what we call the UFO phenomenon has really seriously affected human civilization.
Definitely. Danny, what were you going to say about that?
No, I'm fine. Don's
Don, go ahead.
I still remain more pessimistic.
Oh, come on, Don.
Well,
come
no,
on.
we're amongst us friends here, but right. Just think, and I made the point yesterday, this week we all go back to our regular jobs and our regular communities and everything, and how many of us are going to be able to say where we spent this past weekend?
They will.
That's wonderful, that's great, but I think back to like even when Dennis Kucinich talked about his UFO experience.
Yeah.
And automatically he became the UFO candidate, and that was the end of any chance that he had as far as becoming the candidate for the Democratic Party.
He wasn't as forthright as he needed to be. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback Mr. Kucinich, and I admire him. But
Why vote anyway? It's all rigged.
It's why vote anyway.
He backed down. He backed down.
But if I just might finish, I mean, the ridicule factor is still very much alive. The government has done a tremendous job indoctrinating and dismissing this subject as far as the public over these past 70 years for a reason. And it's one of the reasons that they are now up to 4 explanations concerning Roswell.
Right. But let's talk to Stanton, who's seen, I think, a little bit of change in the history of this movement. Haven't you, Stanton? Please say yes.
Not a hell of a lot.
No?
I think one thing I find is that people are more ready to admit that they've seen a UFO than they would have been years ago. But there hasn't been a really major change, again because of the media, in helping the public understand what's going on. Look, I've only had 11 hecklers and over 700 lectures, and I come on very strong. And 2 of them were drunk. I better. And you get that many people giving you a hard time about sports, religion, politics, or anything. So we're at a point where people are ready to accept the truth, but they live in a world in which they think nobody else is ready to accept the truth.
But there's more of us now, right?
Well, I'm not sure. Putting action to thought is the big problem, I think. How many teachers will teach a seminar on UFOs? How many professors? There have been more than a dozen PhD theses. How many professors are willing to sponsor one? Or even to look at the ones that exist? There is strong resistance on the part of the ancient academics and fossilized physicists to this whole question. Naysaying newsmen, too, will throw in them. You know, I like alliteration. So I've seen, I personally never worry about it because I can handle anything that's been tossed at me. I wasn't sure of that at the beginning, but I am now. But we need to go farther to get the people who are influencing all the other people to do their homework and not let them get away with making... Look, when the Astronomer Royal of England said a couple of years back, only kooks see UFOs, I saw no rebuttal of that, and except in something that I wrote. It's a dumb viewpoint. It has no basis in fact. But nobody corrected it.
But there's been a movement of ridicule that's been paid by the Air Force, and but this is why it's a grassroots movement that's happening with a weekend like this, and why it keeps growing. That's what I see.
Well, I hope it keeps growing, and I don't know what it will accomplish, but I'm an optimist still, or I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.
Okay.
Well, how many, just the people on this panel and many others out there that are often speakers at events like this, how many invitations do you get per annum today as opposed to 5 or 10 years ago?
You're getting more, right?
A lot more.
A lot more.
I get invitations, 50 invitations a year to come here, there, from Brazil to Spain to Ireland to India to all over the world.
And so does Richard and Linda. And
so it just shows you that it's a global phenomenon that is becoming acceptable. People want to know. People are inquisitive.
I have to agree.
So we're doing the job. We are becoming the mainstream. It's not a fringe movement.
Yes.
You know, I keep reminding people there are more scientists in the world that work outside of academic institutions than they are working inside of academic institutions. So you don't need to be attached to a university if you're a scientist. You can be a scientist and work in your garage, but you're still a scientist. And once again,
where's the money come from?
Well, now this brings me to the next subject. All along this evening, I've been listening very carefully, and virtually every one of these panelists at some stage has mentioned the word money. Okay, and it's somehow an obstacle to the progress. There's a black budget and this money, and Stanton didn't have money to go to Roswell and all this, and so you start to realize what's even behind this thing. It's always, until we recognize what is going on this planet, who is really pulling the strings, who is controlling the governments, that are then controlling the flow of information, that are controlling the media, the mainstream media. And until we recognize that and deal with that issue, we're going to be debating this for the next 20 years until something else happens, or for the next 100 years. And this
Are you
is the
preaching
issue
revolution here?
Yeah, he is.
I am preaching a revolution here. Absolutely,
That's what has
a
to
revolution
happen.
of consciousness.
We need a revolution.
And a recognition where the evil comes from. And when I say the word evil, I mean that in a spiritual context, and not in a.
This is just too obvious an opportunity to respond to this. Is that the things that we'd mentioned before is that we need to understand that Pope Francis is getting set to issue a papal encyclical, right in June, right here coming up, in which he's going to directly connect the process of global climate change with transnational corporate capitalism, and if in fact they don't respond by accepting mandatory limits on the global greenhouse gas emissions in the Paris meetings between November 28th and December 11th, he's prepared on December 8th to declare a Jubilee year to order the canceling of debt and eliminate the basic capitalist structure.
The Pope can do that?
The Pope, Francis.
What about like student loans?
Listen, you've got to understand. You've got to understand what's going on. Is that we're not talking about just somebody who's throwing holy water on people here. We're talking about somebody who's starting to move into a position of having moral authority that's almost unprecedented on the planet right now.
I would caution against, as exciting as it may sound, do not underestimate the deviousness of these banking global.
Oh no! I don't.
They plan these things so well.
I don't underestimate that. But one thing I can tell you that they don't plan on is the calling of a jubilee year, canceling all the debt on the planet.
But you know what happens?
They don't anticipate that.
How can he actually do that?
Recognize a deception in that. Hold on. Cancelling the debt doesn't mean cancelling the monetary control and the financial control over humanity. It's like putting a Band-Aid on the global problem, and then it starts all over again.
Well,
that's what we got to deal with.
Actually, when you're dealing with a monetary system that is so grounded in debt itself, that the entire underpinnings of the banking system, with its fractal banking and everything else, is rooted in debt. It's the constant indebting of people and keeping them from paying off the principal and carrying the debt. What I'm suggesting,
especially on fabricated money.
That's right. But all I'm saying to you is that what's happening, what's going to be happening between now and December 8th of this year, I'm just suggesting that you direct your attention to what's going on here.
Do you have to be Catholic?
Francis has called for and has had an agreement now. He's going to be addressing the Joint Assembly of the entire United Nations in September. He's declaring, he's going to be issuing a papal encyclical declaring that the proximate relationship between global climate change and transnational corporate capitalism is the reflection of a sinful structure, a sinful economic system, a system that is rooted in injustice and greed and avarice. He's naming the beast. He's belling the cat. And what I'm saying is that he's calling for the creation of a new, completely alternative economic order on the planet. Now, so what I'm saying is this is responsive to the very things that are being said here at the table, and the fact is that if in fact the nation states don't accept mandatory and legally enforceable restrictions on their corporations, that he's going to in fact call for the Jubilee year on December 8th. And so people need to. All I'm saying, look, people need to understand that there is a process going on now that is being accelerated. Because of the effects of global climate change. Yeah, what's all right. I mean, someday when you could pass a test on what I'm talking about, you can come up and get up here. You know, the bottom line is that there's very dramatic things that are in the offing right now. One of which is that the fact is that there's a major call now for coming to grips with the philosophical and theological implications of contact with an extraterrestrial civilization that's now been issued formally. It's a call for people to participate in that discussion.
By the Vatican.
By the Vatican. And the fact of the matter is that the process of discovering these planets and acknowledging that life is existing on these planets is the process by means of which they're going to try to feather in an acknowledgement of the fact that it's true. What we have to do is take control of the discussion about what the philosophical, theological, and political, importantly, the political implications are of coming to recognize that these people are not in charge. That we have to withdraw our consent to their governing us. That the fact is this is a form of slavery that depends upon our consent and our active participation in that process. So what we have to do is figure out how to come out from under this slavery. That's what we have to do, not wait for them to free us, not wait for the major media to change their mind, not to wait for the Pentagon to change its mind. We have to change our minds, and we have to help other citizens around the world change their mind about all of these things. This is a question of structural justice, and we have to respond to it.
And when you change your mind, you change your state of being. When you change your state of being, that's when you move into the field of infinite probability, and that's where it all happens, and that's where choices are made, right there.
Really, I know what Richard said is true, that 1% of the population owns 50% of the world.
The top 80 people.
Right. So how
80 people.
Yes, we can, put our intentions out there, but how do we change that sort of economics around?
Well, no.
Emoto did water.
No,
Right? I mean, come on, really? Are you familiar with what Emoto did with the minds of people?
Yeah.
Right? Don't we have that choice?
Look, when you say that when they own what they own is 80% of the wealth.
Right.
The fact is that over 80% of the wealth doesn't mean shit. It's just fabricated paper money.
All right.
You know, their financial wealth is predicated upon a mythology. And only if you believe in the mythology do they in fact own 80% of all the property.
Do you agree with that, Richard?
They don't.
No, I do agree with it. I mean, you know, they got it on this kind of mythically created system of fractional reserve banking, which I think many of us are familiar with, and Michael talks about a lot. And but that money that they have that has allowed them to control land. It's allowed them to control physical wealth in terms of resources that are important to all of us. So I'm just saying it's an important thing to deal with. Let me say, for example, when they say that the bank owns your house because you have a mortgage that you owe to them, you've already paid the bank twice as much as your house was worth. And you still owe the principal because all you've been paying. It's a system of thievery. I think we can all agree.
Still take your house away.
All I'm saying is that you don't have to say they own my house. I own my house. Fuck you, trying to come and take my house.
Well, Dan, I mean, that sounds great, but say that to the bank and deal with the police coming to your door.
The point is, they can't send police to everybody's door. This is. I was in this situation.
All should stop paying.
He's
a lawyer too, so it's okay.
I was in this situation when everyone was saying, "Oh, what about resisting the draft?" I can't resist the draft because they're going to come and arrest me and say, "Fuck you, coming to arrest me." Come and arrest everybody.
Totally.
Everybody
Mass movement is essential.
Everybody refuses to go to the draft, and they don't know what to do. So, and Nixon, cowers inside the White House. What I'm saying to you is that if you refuse to grant them their own created mythology, they have no power over you.
So it is a revolution, Stanton.
They don't have enough police. They don't have enough police. They don't have enough people to. This is
a revolution.
They can't file enough lawsuits to put the burden of going forward on them, not the burden of going on us.
You see what you did, Stanton?
This is a new Dan.
So we do have a choice.
I spend my whole life doing this. I mean, I represent people who do this.
Wait, Michael,
without realizing it, Danny has just put his foot and his heart right into the heart of the Ubuntu movement.
Okay.
And this is what we do. Exactly that. This is why it is growing like wildfire. We have members in more than 215 countries around the world. I cannot control it. It is this kind of knowledge and information that we share with the people in South Africa and other countries, and starting with the banking. Because it is with understanding and explaining to people the simple crimes that are committed by the banking families against each and every one of us.
Right.
And you're quite right. You can say, fuck you, this is my house. But unfortunately, they still have the men with guns that they can send to your house. They can't send it to everybody's house.
That's right.
But it's part of the process of educating and informing people about this knowledge and information. It makes them lose their fear. It gives them a sense of understanding what's going on. And that's self-empowerment.
Yeah.
And self-empowerment is a very powerful thing that everybody needs to experience. And with that understanding, then people know what we can do about this situation, how to get out of it. And this is where we bring in the political front becomes a very critical and important alternative.
That's absolutely right.
To anything else out there.
That's right.
And
there needs to be a political movement. There's no doubt about it. And what it's just like is it's like having one man with one bullet in his gun hold 100 people hostage, and everybody's sitting there going, "Oh shit, I don't want him to shoot me," and all you have to do is say, "Well, he can't shoot all of us," and what you do is you just take him down, But the fact is, you have to be willing to put yourself on the line. You have to be willing to do it, and that's why they have lawyers to defend people like that.
Right, well, thank you, Danny.
I have an observation. I'm just listening to everything and hearing everyone, and it's fascinating to me to see how this subject.
This subject has set on fire.
Go ahead, Richard.
Well, I just think it's fascinating how this subject, which is really on beyond the fringe of what's respectable in the establishment culture, let's just say, really can radicalize all of us. And I mean, I just think it's an amazing thing because we're delving into a reality that that is not accepted by the power structure, which does control the establishment media, the propaganda system that seeks to control us. And I really think it's true. Like, the longer we are in this this mindset, and we can't help but come. And when I say radicalized, radical, I think, is derived from the Latin. It means to get to the root of. To be a true radical, you're getting to the root of. That's really, I think, what we're doing, and it has put us in. Without even, I don't even think we're trying, but we're in undeniable opposition to the established system.
But do you think this is what the ETs could be waiting for us to get ourselves together, to take back our power?
That's exactly what they are waiting for.
Yeah, for us
They're
to
waiting
have...
for this movement of this explosion of consciousness, because you can't interact with an unconscious group of...
And they're not going to do it for us.
beings.
They're not going to say, hey, we're here to help you out of the mess you created. We got to do... You're going to be our lawyer for the movement, Danny.
Well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, think about what could they have done like 100 years ago? Would they announce themselves? What would that have done to human civilization?
But
it could have been a really traumatic thing, and you have to get to a point where people are ready for this type of a situation. So it really could be that we needed several generations for our own development.
So what kind of, seriously, what kind of social movement do you think it, what's that? The Warriors of Light out there. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about organizing a social movement in a way Martin Luther King organized the black movement. You know, so how would that look?
Well, what the advantage is that all you have to do is stop cooperating. You know, it's not a matter of you having to tear down mountains, or you just stop cooperating. Don't cooperate with them. You know, and I can tell you, when you start to see certain groups that are in positions of traditional authority moving forward and calling upon people to do this, if in fact you see happen, what I'm suggesting to you is in the process of happening here. If you in this month we're right here just this month in June, it could happen as early as June 5th, because that's Global Environmental Day. And if Francis decides to issue the encyclical on June 5th, it'll be right when we all basically come home, go back to our drudge jobs, right?
I mean, the Pope is going to incite a revolution.
He's going to issue the encyclical. Read the encyclical, and when he says that this is an inherently sinful economic system that is rooted in greed and avarice and deception, and it has to be done away with, because this is threatening the entire global life of our planet. Yeah. And so we've got to do this. And people are going to say, holy shit, what does that mean? You know, what does that mean?
But to add to that, Danny, then the big question here is, what do we do from that point forward? And so you need a plan.
That's right.
And this is where we come in with Ubuntu. We have a plan that seems to be very simple, that seems to be touching the hearts of people, and this is why it resonates. And somebody here earlier said truth resonates, and that's exactly what this comes down to. So when you start sharing the truth about all this stuff with people, they not only see a way out of their desperate misery on a daily basis, and as I said earlier, I see it on a daily basis with people that live on the streets, people that live in shacks that can't afford a loaf of bread every day, and suddenly they see a way out. You can see the light in their eyes when they realize and they recognize where the real problem is. It lies in the money supply and the control of the banking elite of this entire planet. The moment we shut that down and find a new alternative, there is a way forward, and we have to have a plan, and we have a plan. Well, the simple way forward, what we've been sharing with the people, just a simple step forward, and this might not everybody might understand this, but with immediate effect, to stop the privately owned banks and replace them with what we call a people's bank, is such a revolutionary, unimaginable shift and an immediate change in providing a lifeline for every living, breathing human being. It is, and it's so simple. It is such a simple thing to do. And this is what we do.
They did it at Mondragon. That whole thing, they just withdrew from both France and Spain because they were opposed to their fascist governments in Spain and France. So they just withdrew and they set up their entire own economy. And it can be done. I'm just telling you that. And the important thing is that when you have so many people, when you have 1.5 billion people in Western civilization that are all part of the Catholic Church. And this guy, not just any old pope, it's not like Ratzinger that nobody liked anyway. But I mean, but to have a person that's as popular as Francis is and is doing the things that he's doing, to come forward and communicate, when he calls for asking to be able to address the jointly assembled Congress of the United States for the first time in history, and he's going to be talking to Congress in September. He's going to be talking to the United Nations, and he's holding this Damocles over their head that if you do not, in fact, agree to legally enforceable restrictions on your corporations with this issue of issuing forth global greenhouse gas emissions, the fact of the matter is I'm going to declare the Jubilee. I'm going to cancel these debts. I'm going to tell everybody they don't have to pay their debts. And they're going to say, gee, I wonder what people are going to do in response to that.
Linda,
they're going to do something.
Is there a history, is there a precedent where the Pope has called for a jubilee to eliminate debt?
No, it's a Hebrew tradition. It's an ancient Hebrew tradition out of the Bible that they were opposed to usury. It was a sin. They said that you cannot, in fact, allow a debt to last for more than 7 years. And at the end of the 7-year period, all of the rabbis would come forward if they determined that there was too much debt in the culture. They would declare a jubilee year, and they would completely cancel all the debt in their entire culture. So what I'm saying is he's calling upon an ancient tradition that goes deep into the Judeo-Christian culture, and he's calling it forth. And so we need to understand that there's some dramatic things that are happening, not just for their call in the same Jesuit order. I'm telling you, the same Jesuit order.
But how would it be applied in this global...
By people refusing to pay their debts.
Because the Pope says so.
Because the Pope says you don't have to.
You don't have to.
The nation states don't have to pay the International Monetary Fund. They don't have to pay the World Bank.
What about separation of state?
I've just seen through the veil of deception there. I think I've just figured it out.
Wait, before you get there, why don't we, this person in the audience has something to say about it all.
It would take Greece off the hook.
Thank you very much for allowing me to say something. I really appreciate what you do.
Bring it closer to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I really appreciate what is going on here this weekend. It's very powerful, very important. It is going to make a major difference. What I understand needs to happen is to have an umbrella vision, because nothing will happen unless there's a vision, a collective vision that covers all the elements of the liberation movement, because the liberation movement can cover every topic that we've covered since we've been here. So I see that a liberation movement, I'm part of Ubuntu or whatever under the liberation movement, because that's what the public needs, a vision. Without a vision, things are not, we're all fractionized, working independently, unless we have an umbrella cover to work under.
Well, there's at least one liberation movement representative at this table.
But no, everyone here represents a liberation movement. Even
at
Stanton.
least one. Yeah, at least one.
Are you still with us, Stanton? Yeah. No, because is it too much? Was it too much anarchy? No, because you represent a liberation movement, a liberation of truth. I just want to get you back into the picture.
I am not in a position to evaluate the potential impact of the actions of a pope on our planet. I have a great respect for this pope.
Yes, absolutely.
He has shown courage.
We all do.
But I think what this person said, as far as each of us, representing an aspect of a truth movement is something that we need to confer and come together about. Yes, Don.
I truly think Danny may be onto something, and I can say that as a Roman Catholic.
Okay.
So, in the summer of 1947, immediately after Roswell, the Vatican put out a statement which read, "It is the position of the Church the universe is most likely teeming with other creations." Within the last few years, it reiterated that position. When Pope Francis himself was asked, what would the Church be inclined to do upon the arrival of an intelligence from off the planet? And the response was, we would baptize them.
I don't know
for
if that's
all
a
of
good
our
idea.
hopes, all of our concerns that the United States government is ever going to disclose something that it has worked harder on one topic than anything else its entire history to cover up, maybe we should be approaching the church.
But you know, the church has it's a good and bad approach. You know, I don't think the aliens want to be baptized.
We would be talking about 1.5 billion people.
Let me address the issue of baptism.
And aliens.
Okay.
That'd be much better for it, right?
The fact of the matter is that Father Fuentes, excuse me, hold on. That Father Fuentes, who is the Jesuit director of the observatory, when this issue was raised to him that the Pope had made reference to, I would baptize the aliens, he actually went so far as to say, actually, the aliens may not be in need of baptism because the sin of our having fallen into the original sin is a function of the evolution of our intellect, of perceiving ourselves as separate and apart from all of the rest of the unity of the universe, and they may have already gone through that. And they may have already transcended that and be in union with the universe and may not be in need of baptism. So I'm telling you, this is a very sophisticated conversation that's going on right now.
Did the Pope actually say that? Did the Pope actually say that?
That was Father Fuentes. That was Father Jose Fuentes.
That's
And who operates more observatories around the world than any other organization? The Vatican. And they're not watching for the second coming.
I just like to say, of course, I agree with everything that all of you are saying, but we have to take into the consideration that you're talking about 80 people that are running this world. Yeah. Well, the problem is that most of the people in this world want to be part of that 80. And not only that, they want to be the richest people in the world. So the system is set up. When we as a people change, and we as a people start to change the way we think and stop being so greedy, and I'm talking about all of us, I'm not just talking about these 80 people, because you know, I've been in business most of my life, and I've seen people who didn't have anything, and all of a sudden I noticed once they started to get something or they started to get rich, they changed completely into a whole different human being. So when the consciousness of this planet changes, everything will change.
Thank you.
Well, we need deep philosophy, and that's what's called wisdom.
We're going to wrap up, but I don't think we need more religion. I think we need to baptize those 80 people, and the rest of us open up to cosmic consciousness, because awakening the new human brain, the new capacities, will put us in more direct connection with something beyond.
That is exactly what relegare is. Relegare, the Latin root of it, is to relink. To relink. That's what the whole process we're talking about is to taking our human family that is suffering from an affliction of the intellect, this capacity to perceive ourselves as separate and apart from the rest of the universe, and to transcend that through the process of relegare. We're relinking back to
without the religion part thrown in.
Let's
relink to the source, which is and lift ourselves beyond what we have been.
That's exactly what the whole purpose of this is to salvage the substance of spirituality. Okay. That's what the key to this thing is. Okay. And one of the things that and I'll just put one more final point in. The fact is that Francis, knowing that people are going to say, well, might not they kill him? Yeah. You remember Bishop Romero in El Salvador, when he called upon he called upon the Salvadorian troops to refuse to obey the orders of their commanding officers, ordering them to kill their sisters and brothers, the peasants. And they said, oh, if you make that kind of call, they will kill you. And he said, if they kill me, I will rise again in the names of my people. And that's what he's doing. He's rising in the voice of his people. And Francis has just declared him, he wants to make him a saint. Okay. Now all of that stuff is important, because what's getting ready to happen is Francis has said, you aren't going to be able to kill me because I'm going to retire. When I get this thing done, I'm going to retire. And what people don't realize is the guy that's going to take his place is Sean O'Malley, who is in fact going to be the first American Pope. Sean O'Malley is the guy that put all the pedophile priests into jail, rather than give them sanctifying grace or let them go to confession.
But Danny, don't you think it's the time to end religion? They've really
It's the time to substitute spirituality for religion.
We don't need religion if we have spirituality. We don't need the middleman to get in between us and the
Alan,
yes. Sure.
take a break here, okay? I'm trying to come here to tell you that I've spent my entire career not only confronting the Ku Klux Klan, the American Nazi Party, the off-the-shelf
I respect what you do.
No.
Yeah.
What I'm telling you is then listen to me. Listen to your counsel. It's bad to have a mouthy client who doesn't listen to you.
I'm not your client.
What I'm saying to you is don't get confused by the nomenclature here. We're talking about genuine spirituality, which has to do with consciousness, which has to do with the entire subject we've been talking about all weekend. 3/4 of what we're talking about is consciousness, the elevated stream of consciousness, the freeing of ourselves from slavery. The reality is that we now have a group of people in some of the highest institutions in the Jesuit order have basically arisen up to betray the old church.
Well, thank you.
They've risen up. In fact, there's a major book, I suggest it all to you. It's called The Jesuits, The Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church, because they've now been declared to be the spearhead, the point of the spear of the social justice movement on the planet. And this is the first Jesuit Pope, and he's now moving to do exactly that. And I'm suggesting that people pay attention and get on board this thing and understand what's happening here so that we don't despair, we don't give power to these people. And if in fact he steps forward and calls for the Jubilee year, then listen to it and declare a Jubilee year.
Okay, thank you. Linda, and then we'll wrap up, yes.
This is the best panel I have ever been on.
Longest anyway.
And what I am hearing and seeing is that for the first time, I'm with a group of people who are saying that the church, religion, spirit, and soul could substitute for the banks and the politicians.
Okay, I'm with you. Yes.
And that may be the leverage point that is needed.
Well, go ahead.
Just remember that
use the institutions. Use the institutions when you can use them. That's the key to this thing. Don't jettison everything. Don't throw out the baby with the bath.
And those institutions are crumbling slowly, and they will evolve into something bigger for all of us. Michael.
I was just going to remember that the biggest religion in the world today, undoubtedly, without any question, is money. Money is the biggest religion. You can't attack it. You can attack the Jews, the Catholics, the Muslims. You can attack anyone, but if you attack money, people go, "Are you crazy?" So this is.
Well, that's what Chuck was saying.
Exactly. So I deal with this every day. Every day.
And that's exactly what Francis said. He issued a major papal statement getting ready for this. It's called Evangelii Gaudium, and what he said is that religion and bankers have become the new religion. That's what he said. Yeah. And he said they've got to be disenthroned.
Yeah. And they are getting disenthroned very quickly.
Right. Are you saying that Francis is trying to go beyond that greed, the money of religion, and get people back to spirituality?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
That's exactly.
All right. I get it. Okay. All right.
The one, and this is where my analysis of the deviousness of the global cabal, or whatever you want to call them, those that control the men with guns. If you, whoever they may be, if the Pope declares the Jubilee and people stop paying their bonds and everything, you're creating a chaotic situation. I mean, it's going to be chaos. And this is exactly the kind of situation that the cabal is waiting for, so they can put some people into the field camps and start.
I can assure you.
I'm just throwing that out
I can assure you, Michael. I not only understand that, I know where the bank accounts are of the places they've set up to put people. So I know what I'm talking about here. So what I'm saying is that's why, if it's done by an institution itself, when the call is made by an institution itself, it can help supply the stability that wouldn't otherwise be there. So it's not just open-ended chaos. What it is it's taking out another institution that has attempted to substitute itself for the religions of the world. And that's what's getting ready to happen.
Okay, we're almost, but we're having a lot of fun. I know it's been, but
it's absolutely
we have one more question, and this panel was called New Beginnings, and I think we
I wanted to add to that quickly, because this is exactly what I'm dealing with in my workshop tomorrow.
Okay, we'll get to that, but let's ask one more question.
on behalf of everyone here, if I may, I just have to say thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart and my community to each and every one of you up there, including you, Stan. I know you're not saying much. But this is so important, and from sitting back here, I see you guys speaking the same language, and I see you guys connecting very well together on this issue to bring it to that level you're talking about Ubuntu. Michael, we're from Vancouver. We're working with Russo up there. Trust me, I get it. And what you're saying, Daniel, I think is really, really important. We can't overlook or discredit one another. This is all so important, and as everybody has said here and intimated, the day that we stop worshiping money and valuing things instead of worshiping God and valuing each other, that's exactly what we're talking about. And that, you can call it a religion or whatever, but from my perspective, this is just changing that word to have a new definition. And the spirit in which we live, in which we give, in which we think, in which we connect, in which we breathe, in which we share, in which we create, that's the spirit I'm talking about.
Yeah, all right. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're all in agreement in a way, now that I understand the Pope's position, and thank you. So, I mean, I don't want to wrap up, but we don't have to end this weekend. We can.
I need a whiskey.
He needs a whiskey.
Yeah, I'm with Tellinger.
But we'll all get a whiskey. It's be like Woodstock. Let's just 3 days out here. But, you know, if we're going to, like, really start something new, and you have a plan, Michael, why don't you just tell us, you know, wrap it up on your end there and put your, like, piece of the puzzle out there so we can move forward in that direction.
Well, I'll start the wrapping up.
What's that? Yeah, share your plan.
I wish I could share my plan. It's a little bit longer than 60 seconds.
More than 60 seconds.
But really, this is exactly what I'm going to be dealing with in my workshop, the Ubuntu workshop tomorrow.
Give us a little bit.
Just to deal about what do we do into the future. Now that we know all this stuff, what do we do? And the first thing we need to do is recognize that money is the problem. And once we overcome that problem, we will create a planet and a world of abundance. Money is the obstacle, the hurdle to creating abundance. Money is the tool that creates hierarchy. It creates corporate structures that deals in the corporate structures that uses money to create scarcity and uses competition to create the scarcity. At the moment you remove money from the system and you work with cooperation among people and communities rather than competition, you create abundance beyond your wildest belief. The solutions are so simple, but we've been so programmed to not see the simple solutions. And this is really what I'm going to be talking about and dealing with, and what we're doing about it with the Ubuntu movement around the world, with the Ubuntu political parties around the world, which includes the United States and Canada, South Africa, UK, Australia, Germany, and about 50 other countries, and how we provide very simple solutions by allowing communities to start cooperating and no longer.
Yes, as some of you may know, that I was chief counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. And during that time, I was contacted by the Congressional Research Service and participated in the 1977 research project that was asked to be done by President Jimmy Carter to provide information to the President on the potential existence of extraterrestrial intelligence and the relationship between that and these UFO sightings. And I participated in that, and that study came to the conclusion that there were at least from 2 to 6, it was a very conservative estimate, from 2 to 6 other highly intelligent, highly technologically developed civilizations in our own galaxy. And the fact that there are 500 billion galaxies would tend to give one, at that time, even in 1977, the understanding of the fundamental reality of the fact that our human species was not only not physically located in the center of the universe, as had one time been thought up until Galileo and Copernicus, and the major trauma that was inflicted upon the Western world upon coming to that realization, and how hard that was fought back against by the churches and the royalists in the world. But the fact of the matter is that we've now come to grips with the reality that we're not physically located in the center of the universe, but we have substituted for that this new mythology that we are somehow located at the absolute apex of the pyramid of life. And we're on the brink at this time of coming to realize that that's not true either. And yet our own self-image, which is central to our understanding of the purpose of our human lives, the role that we play in the universe, our place in the galaxy, all of those issues are fundamental issues that address the fundamental questions of what we refer to as spirituality. How did the universe come into existence? Is the universe unfolding towards some specific purpose that lends meaning to the universe? How did consciousness arise in an otherwise apparently non-sentient universe of matter, mass, and energy? And what are the faculties that our human species has by means of which we can possibly answer questions like that? These are all fundamental, profound philosophical and theological questions. We talked about that some this morning at our gathering. We'll talk about it more throughout the entire weekend, because the coming to grips with these fundamental questions is a call that has been issued now by the Jesuit order in the Catholic Church, the largest order and the largest single denomination in Western civilization, asking us all to come together as private citizens and laypersons to discuss this question as to what we believe the philosophical and theological implications to be of our actually having direct contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. Does that displace us from the role that we thought we played in the universe? Is there more that we can bring to a relationship with these other civilizations that can shed light on what we understand our relationship to be? And what do we have to learn from another civilization that may be literally millions of years in advance of us, technologically and intellectually? Might we still be equals of them in the spiritual realm? These are all fundamental questions that we're going to be talking about.
Out there, and there's, also beautiful beings out there waiting to meet. How do you integrate that in your own mind, consciousness?
I think the harsh realities just help us to become stronger. I mean, every harsh reality I've ever been through has made me who I am today, and I love those experiences. I bless those experiences. I mean, if you look around, sometimes people who have it easy take it for granted, and they end up sort of crashing, or they end up misusing the power. And, coming into the Eisenhower family with maybe expectations that I might move into politics, I decided to go real deep and understand the nature of energy and learn from energy and really get an idea of like where the energy is on the planet right now. And we're on a planet that's definitely very challenged. And the thing is, when we're born into a control system and we're limited, which we actually weren't when we are in these higher, more advanced civilizations with more DNA activated, we were 12-strand potential and beyond, we have those memories. Well, things changed. That's a long story. Those are my presentations. And now that we're experiencing a more limited version of ourselves, what we're really awakening to is really no big surprise. I think we're actually really comfortable with it. I think it makes us feel like relieved, like, thank God I didn't want to listen in school kind of thing. Like, thank God I didn't want to go to church, because I was really wondering, like, why, like, none of this was resonating. And I think we're really healing a lot of the stigmas and projections that come from being an expanded multidimensional being, because that's what we are. And I think in these times we're increasing our spirituality the more we discover what's out there. And it certainly does not negate there being a god or goddess or source energy. It's just we're in a multidimensional cosmos. There's like 7 universes or so. And there's a ton of beings. But we're in a free will universe, and it's a little bit different because the founder races, who were bringing that energy of the intention of source through them to seed life in the time matrix, through free will, some of those entities decided to experiment a little bit with power, and the negative ego ended up emerging from the imbalance of the masculine and feminine as well. And so the harsh reality is us, really needing to look at ourselves. And I came in a very sensitive being with a very big open heart, and so I joke and say it's been a boot camp to learn how to be a real bitch. And I think for those that come in very cold and very closed off, their lessons might be about expansion and being warmer. But I think as individuals, we get exactly what we need. And so the harshness is that we're not going to walk away without gaining something immense and beautiful and enriching and meaningful. And we have to understand that the adversity is an incredible way to get there, because two people are going to experience something different. So where I might end up in a challenge because I might be vulnerable or open-hearted to people that probably don't deserve it, somebody else might have a really strong boundary and never need to meet those people. So, or some people might refuse certain information that could really benefit them, while others are all about it. So the harshness, to me, is like exercising a muscle. People volunteer for pain. They climb Mount Everest. We birth children. Actually, it shouldn't hurt as much as it does, but we're learning to get back into our divine feminine. But the thing is, when we sign up for pain, exercise and stretching our, boundaries to push the limit, we're totally fine with it. We know it makes us strong. But when it comes at us out of left field and we feel like we didn't invite it, then it feels like a violation. And that's something we need to, understand. What are the deeper reasons, and what do we need to do? Where do we need boundaries, and where do we need openness? And nobody can make those decisions for you but you. And to me, oneness is diversity and harmony, and we have to learn to respect each other's individual paths, where we are on our path, and just allow ourselves to have an open experience, so that when the harsh realities show up, we have
this weekend, and they begin to set the stage for the dialogue that we need to have as lay people, as people who have special spiritual gifts to bring to this discussion, or extraordinarily important experiences, personal experiences of some of the people that are here this weekend, of actually having encountered extraterrestrial beings, to share with us what type of questions came up in their communications with these other beings about these fundamental spiritual questions. So this is a profoundly central question to this entire issue of extraterrestrial intelligence. And we have a panel here today of people that have important opinions about that, and they're here to share them with you this evening at the beginning of our gathering here together this weekend.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan Sheehan. I mean, I think part of it is the fact, and maybe Linda, you can talk about this idea of sentience. I mean, there are beings that are, definitely more evolved on a mental, intellectual, intelligence level. They can see many dimensions at once, but the sense of consciousness, I mean, Grant Cameron, if he's here, talks about this idea of consciousness being the key. And so where does sentience and consciousness fit into this equal exchange that we have when we meet these EBINs, extra-biological entities?
So many times people have asked me, how could you go out into pastures by yourself and cut tissue and put it in formalin and get it back to scientists, and why wouldn't you be terrified? And when I think back to, you mentioned what happened to me in the mountains, and I'll just share the story because it goes to the heart of that question also about fear in the face of unknown extraterrestrials, other dimensionals, time travelers. I was 21 years old, and I was up in the mountains with my brother and cousin, and I had climbed a mountain because I liked to do that physical climbing and come down. And my brother was fishing and my cousin was reading, and I had gone up with the idea that I would get down in time for, they were going to cook dinner down at the river. And I was very familiar with this path and with this mountain in Johnson Creek in the, up in the Salmon River country of Idaho. And I remember that I had gotten up to this place that I like to go to look in a large vista, and I had turned around and started back. And I noticed the first thing were orange beams of light to my right coming down through the trees. Not exactly like sunlight. It was a very strange change in the atmosphere at that moment. And my last memory clearly was that I'm walking toward these orange beams of light with great curiosity. That's what I remember. What is this? When I felt like when 24 frames in a camera are run back at 96 and everything is moving in slow motion suddenly, and I remember that very clearly, but no fear. And then my next memory is that I'm down further in the mountain and I'm on a path, and it was June, and the summer flowers were beginning to come out. And I realized that along the path that there were flowers that were pulsing. They were pulsing light. They were brilliant white with orchid borders. And I had a reaction to seeing the flower pulsing in light to
brought up the point of a kind of altered reality, a shift in consciousness that awakens, and sometimes it awakens when you're meeting these ETs. You're shifted in consciousness because they don't exist in the same field we exist in. So we shift, we kind of go into an altered state. And Dr. Dream, you work with that kind of stuff, don't you? Shifting people and getting into those states, and talk about your...
Yeah, this whole conversation for the panel has unfolded in a very interesting way for me. You started out by talking about DMT and being produced in our brains. And it immediately took me back to the fact that if it weren't for DMT and my experiences with this powerful teacher, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. That was my breaking open part of the experience. That opened me up to, I mean, I grew up Jewish in Omaha, Nebraska. I needed something really powerful to crack this one open. And there's a lot of truth in that. My parents were conservative, relatively conservative in this and that, and there wasn't yoga and meditation being done around me. And after well over 100 experiences with what I refer to as the others, the beings that I come into contact with in the DMT experience, my level of fear about what we will be encountering in the future is non-existent. I have no concerns about what the beings and what our experience will be. It is what it's done for me in my life and in my spiritual life, and what my life is about and my outreach is I'm not so focused on what I'm not experiencing right now. I'm not searching, I'm not calling forth contact with other beings. At this time, what I'm feeling is the most fertile opportunity is the inner journey. And so my experience at this time is taking everything in my outer experience of reality and bringing it back for me in the inner journey, and to learn my lessons and to assist me in expanding and moving more completely into the energies that you were talking about, cherishing and peace and everything like that. And to me, that's the greatest that I can do right now. And it's what keeps me, after all of these experiences that I've had completely out of this reality, and yet as solid and as real as I sit here right now, and as I touch your shoulder and I touch your knee. After all of that,
they know each other.
After all of that, it's really about how to stay grounded here. It's about how to expand into who I came here to be. And that's become my focus, and everything else that I encounter keeps bringing me back to that and allowing me to just completely and more fully expand into those energies. And as far as everything else, I'm open to contact, I'm open to all of it. And really having gone through a process of releasing ideas of what it may all be about and opening up to the true reality of what it is.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So Laura, how do you mix those realities, those inner realities of that piece that Dr. Dream talked about, with the idea that there's, you know, there's some harsh realities.
Run to make everything go back to normal. Not out of fear, but out of a certain confusion of what is happening. And I ran and stopped, and then as far as I could see, all around me, all of the flowers were pulsing this bright, brilliant white light that had this orchid edge. And when I look back up now, the mountain, the sun had just gone down behind this big mountain. And for those of you who have ever seen the Van Gogh paintings in the last year of his life, and especially the Starry Night, and you see the energy doing this inside of a hill or a mountain, that's exactly what it looked like, but for real to my eyes. And the whole mountain seemed to be breathing. And there were 2 or 3 stars as the sun went down that came out, and now they're pulsing exactly like the flower. And I remember suddenly feeling like there was pressure and there was some kind of a temperature. And I had been standing there in awe of what is happening, but something raised my hands in front of me, and a thought voice came into my mind as I'm watching my hands rise up in front of me, and it said to me, "You are one with the light is one with you, and you are in the hands of God forever." And then, while my hands are being kept in place, it was like a count of 10 to 1, that the whole pulsing light rheostated down to look normal. And as I stood there with my hands in front of me, this other thought came through my mind. This is what reality really is. That underneath every container body, every plant, every animal, every surface, whether it is this planet or a planet 13.9 billion light years from now, all of it, the reality has to do with pulsing light and energy, and what I came in my own mind after that to think of as the divine field. Not a building, not a religion, a divine field that is responsible for all matter worlds, no matter how many universes there are. And it has always been a solid ground in my life, that I could always stand on that ground in my mind, no matter what I was doing and no matter how bizarre whatever I encountered. And that is the way I feel about the non-humans. Whatever they are, whatever the agendas, whether positive or negative, to me, they are like having the surface of this reality lifted up for a while in those mountains in Idaho for me. And then when it was closed back down, you can't experience that without the rest of your life. You have that in everything you do. And suddenly things are not so scary, because in the end, I think that there is something true about it. And so when you ask the question, where is the bridge, where is the union, where do we get from where we are in a world that is now so disconnected and so harsh to what everybody would like, which is peace and life being cherished. We're on a planet where the life is not cherished. And if we made that transition, then how could non-humans be frightened?
Yeah, thank you, Linda. You also